Our next speaker is well known to us all, and I'd like you to give our Minister for Regional Development, Jaala Pulford, a very big welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Goodbye, Marlene. I'll see you soon. I'd like to also begin by acknowledging traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered and pay my respects to elders past and present. Rob and your executive team, mayors, CEOs, it's just fabulous to be with you all today. I'm looking around the room. I reckon I've seen half of you in the last couple of weeks, so it's nice to see you all again. So I last addressed a Rural Councils Forum in April, and it was about 5 minutes before the state budget, and it's really great to be with you all again. Obviously a fair bit's happened since then, and I was it's obviously that point in the cycle now where you sort of reflect on, where we've been over the last 4 years and where we're going, or where we hope to be going next. But in almost no time at all, a little less than 2 weeks now, this government and the Parliament will sort of expire technically and trip into caretaker stage. So in addition to spending as much time as possible visiting and spending time in each of your communities, I'm also trying to get every single thing signed, every single thing out the door, and as much done as we possibly can. So the frenetic pace with which our government started is continuing right down to the very, very last moment. It has been a really busy 4 years, and what happens next is obviously in the hands of the Victorian community. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the choice that I think that represents for the Victorians, all Victorians, but particularly for people in the communities that you represent and that I work very closely with in my responsibilities, both as Minister for Regional Development and Agriculture, but also as a member for Western Victoria. So when I was elected 12 years ago, the electorate had 21 local government areas, and then we had an electoral redistribution, and now there's 24, and this is an electorate that's larger than Tasmania by population and by land mass. And when I was first elected, I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Where do I start? And I started with you guys. I started with councils, and I scheduled a meeting with the mayor and the CEO in each of them. And I was kind of on this sort of personal quest to see if there was one thing that my electorate had in common with all the rest of it. And there isn't. I had a really good look, but the relationship that I have with you and with your organisations are relationships that I value really deeply, and certainly look forward to and hope to be able to continue in that vein over the next 4 years, should we all be so lucky. But the work that you do for your communities is remarkable, and and without making generalisations about different rural councils, you manage a lot, you manage enormous responsibilities, very high expectations from your communities, and you do it with really limited resources. And I think that's a great credit to council CEOs and their staff that support you, but it's also a great credit to councillors who have such a direct relationship with the people that they represent in making those decisions. And they're not easy decisions. We have the same budgets to manage, an endless list of fabulous ideas and competing resources, and they're difficult decisions. So I think I would take the opportunity to thank you for the partnership and the friendship over many years, but also to thank you for the really tireless work that you do for your communities. So this next little bit, this election season that we're in, is really about that choice that people have. And if I could just talk about that for a minute. This is really a choice between a government that has worked very hard with a very clear plan about where we want to go and what we want the state to be like, and an opposition that I would put to you is a risky proposition. And the stakes are higher for our rural communities than they are for Melbourne, I think. In much the same way that councillors that represent rural communities are closer to the communities they serve because it's just that much more direct a relationship. Similarly, when you have a government that prefers small government, that has a consistent approach to things like reducing health and education budgets, it's the rural communities that are most impacted every time that happens. And if I cast my mind back 4 years, what was everyone thinking about and talking about in the lead up to the last election? Well, in my experience, people were losing confidence fast in their ambulance service, and they were and confidence was shot in TAFE. We had campus closures and great damage being done. So this is something that we know from lived experience, and this is the risk that I think face our communities in the next however many days it is, 37, 38, something like that. So if our government is not elected, it's not like we won't have died wondering, and you would have all noticed the real change in tempo when we were first elected. We have a Premier who likes to build things. You've all heard about the level crossings, I imagine, but equally things in your communities. I'm looking around the room and I'm thinking of the projects in Bullock, for instance. I can see the things that we're doing in the Shipwreck Coast, some of the projects that we have in tourism in northeastern Victoria. I mean, you all know your own story and what it is that you're working on with us. And again, as you pretty much can take to the bank with Labor governments, we have education investment at the very top of our list. So saving TAFE has been an enormous priority. And since we talked about this back in April, we've taken this to a whole new level, and Gail Tierney, who I know is known to very many of you, the person I share Western Victoria electorate with, has now announced that we'll have TAFE courses free, 30 free TAFE courses. And if re-elected, we will undertake the largest education reform that Victoria has ever seen, and that's 3-year-old kinder. Now, this is very bad news. Looking around the room and hazarding a polite but educated guess about how old you are, this is very bad news for all of you. 90% of a person's brain development happens in the first 5 years. That's the bad news for all of us. But it's good news for the little kids. But 2 years of preschool is vastly better than 1 for kids. And so this transformational policy, and I pay credit to my great friend and upper house buddy, Jenny Makakos, who's the early years minister, this policy will begin in rural Victoria. So in Bullock, Hindmarsh, Northern Gramps, South Gippsland, Strathbogie and Yarriambiack, 3-year-old kinder will be rolled out. The following year, there'll be 15 more rural local government areas, and then by 2020, every 3-year-old, every child born in the next term of our government has access to at least 5 hours of 3-year-old kinder a week. And over a decade, with nearly $5 billion invested, 780 new kindergartens built and 170 services expanded, every 3-year-old will have access to 15 hours of free kinder a week. And I mentioned that to you, the revolution in education and in early years education, not just because it begins in rural Victoria, but because childhood literacy and learning is a regional development issue. And so when I talk to you about what matters most to your communities, you always talk to me about the educational attainment gap. You always talk to me about the pathways to school. When I talk to your industries, they talk to me about the availability of their workforce. All of this has its roots in what happens when 90% of brain development's going on in our very, very little people. And you guys, I know, do wonderful work in maternal and child health services and in early years services more broadly, and that's incredibly important work, and it is an incredibly important regional development issue. So Ross Gittins, who's an economist at The Age, said very nice things about this. He said that he could not think of any other single initiative more likely to benefit us socially and economically, and to do so at relatively modest cost to taxpayers. By improving early childhood learning and starting in rural Victoria, we're really tackling education disadvantage. And when a government tackles disadvantage rather than does things to exacerbate it, then it's the smaller rural communities that receive the attention not only that they need, but that they deserve. Now, I don't need to talk to you about the resilience of rural communities, the spirit of true collectivism and the innovation in your communities. Just having a conversation a few minutes ago about the St Patrick's Day fires in southwestern Victoria and watching the community response to something like that is quite extraordinary. I was in the Murrindindi Shire last week, and this time last week, and if you don't really need to go anywhere else to learn about resilience and the strength of rural communities after a visit to meet with people who are rebuilding their communities after the 2009 bushfires. But Rapanyup is just one story that I wanted to share with you, and apologies if you've heard this. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. So the community of Rapanyup are fighting back. Specifically, they're rebuilding their retail precinct so that the people who live in Rapanyup, all 536 of them, according to the last census, can do what lots and lots of people take for granted, that is shop locally. They've organised support from the Bendigo Bank, the Ariambiack Shire, who've been a wonderful support, and Enterprise Rapanyup, and they've raised more than $700,000. And they came to us and they said, we want to buy a supermarket. And I was a bit worried about us getting into buying supermarkets because, where do you stop? And how would I ever explain that to the Treasurer? But they have a wonderful structure for social enterprise in Rapanyup, ERUP, and they are purchasing the town's ailing supermarket. We've given them $500,000 to help them do it, and they're going to create a little mall-style operation which will include a pharmacy, a cafe, community space and a meeting area. The people who've been running the supermarket in Rapanyup for 20 years are done, and they're ready to go on with the next stage of their life. But this is just an extraordinary example of community resilience, the likes of which you all know about in your own communities. And just on resilience, I ran into Gary last night from East Gippsland, and we were talking about drought. East Gippsland and Wellington are in drought, and the northern half of the state are increasingly concerned about dry conditions. It's been an incredibly disappointing end to the spring, and everybody had been waiting till the end of September, waiting till the grand final weekend, whatever everybody's marker is, depending on where they are in the state, for the rain that didn't really come. So 2 failed seasons in east and central Gippsland, dry conditions in north and northwestern Victoria. Of course, our farmers are very professional, very capable, and they plan for dry seasons, but our government, as we always do, know that it's incredibly important for us to step in and assist where people are falling through the cracks and in times where people need additional support. So we've announced $5 million in drought funding, substantially targeted to Gippsland, and within the next week or so we'll be making further announcements, which is putting the finishing touches on support for those dry conditions and drought. But this includes business assistance for farmers, direct support, an employment program, mental health support, a number of other things. Some funding for local councils to coordinate effort, and councils, Gary and his team have done a wonderful job, and similarly up the road in Wellington, to bring people together and to give us a really good indication of what their community needs and what their priorities are. So we will keep working with our rural industries and our farming families and farming communities as the need arises, whether it's in drought. We had very, very difficult times with our dairy community, and anxiety is rising again for our dairy communities. Lots and lots of examples. I was on Phillip Island on Saturday. Again, a small community that's been rocked by a horrific family violence incident and is coming together in quite a remarkable way. lots and lots of examples, but important parts of the rich tapestry that are our rural communities. So when you look at the big picture across the 4 years and where our effort has been made, our government has invested close to $2 for every dollar spent by the former coalition government. So the Treasury numbers on this specifically, $13.6 billion over 4 budgets compared to 7.2. So that's just a huge amount. So whether you're looking at additional services for mental health, additional effort in our hospitals, schools that are being built, schools that are being repaired, biosecurity funding to support, our $14 billion ag industry. The list is long. So more than 45,000 jobs created in regional Victoria, and I know one of the things that Rob and the team have been advocating to us about, and it is a big theme of your election year advocacy document, is around addressing skills shortages and the question of population growth in the right places at the right time. But we have created an environment that is very, very conducive to people wanting to live in regional Victoria, because of course people don't spontaneously wake up and move to somewhere that they've never been before, absent a job or an existing connection to the place, and confidence in the services that families need and care about. So employment growth in regional Victoria is double the national rate. Regional unemployment was 6.6% 4 years ago. It's now 4.5%. So the Victorian economy is confident. Infrastructure investment is unprecedented. Businesses are prospering. And so jobs and population growth are booming. They are. And so whether that's record investments in regional roads, almost $1 billion in the last budget, including, as Marlene mentioned, $100 million to assist with councils' responsibilities to council roads over a couple of years, and the lowest payroll tax rate in the nation is found in regional Victoria. Those first homeowner building incentives are keeping our builders very busy. Across regional Victoria, 4,300 home buyers have received the first home owner grant. Lots of people avoiding stamp duty altogether. And the winners, the Treasurer's Office tell us, include Bass Coast, Moorabool, Wellington and East Gippsland for the communities that are absolutely cleaning up using those new tax arrangements. Almost double the investment in regional communities compared to the previous government, which was characterised by cuts to health and education and transport services, and of course, our beautiful agricultural sector. So what's on offer from the other side? And you'll hear about this, no doubt, from Matthew this afternoon. Decentralisation. It's kind of like the buzzword of the year. Means something completely different to everyone, of course. Some people think it's all about public sector job relocation. Some people think it's about making industries move. Some people think it's about taking immigrants and putting them in certain places. And the federal government flat out for a distraction, I think, just sort of, throwing all kinds of interesting ideas around, some really awful ones this week. But so there is this kind of interesting question, I think, for our regional communities about what's on offer this election. Our political opponents are sort of promising a population policy sort of magic trick of sorts, where there'll be some sort of massive exodus from Melbourne into regional communities. And what they're telling Melbourne audiences is there's going to be a whole lot of people, that are going to leave and going to move. That doesn't really work without a necessary jobs plan and the strategies to support strong employment growth. Again, some talk of regional fast trains, but again, I'd sort of remind you of the promises that were made in 2010 about airport rail. Nothing happened. About the train line from Geelong to Bendigo via Ballarat, like whatever happened to that. I see in my role, I keep an eye on all of your papers, and so I see sort of quite extraordinary breadth of regional media coverage of state government issues. And how it looks from my perspective is that communities are being told what they want to hear. So in Mildura they're being told one thing, in Horsham they're being told another thing, in the southwest they're being told another thing, in the northeast they're being told another thing, in Geelong they're being told something, in Ballarat they're being told something, in Bendigo, in Gippsland and so on. And it just doesn't add up. Like at all. And when you look at the ads that are being run in Bendigo, they bear no relationship to the things that people in Mildura are being told. So I would encourage people to seek the detail about when these things are actually going to happen, because the fast rail plan involves an intersection with the Melbourne Metro project and the connection to the airport, and the time frame just doesn't make sense. Like, these things need to be done in a particular sequence. And then, of course, talking about population, and I noticed in your advocacy document, and I think it's really important, that that statement about this is different, this is very different in each community, and I think that's really important. I think that's been lost somewhere in the debate. That some communities in regional Victoria want population attraction and some don't. And, you know, the idea that you know, some communities that very much love how they are at the moment, that very much love their current character, are really uneasy about the idea of having their population doubled. So, after years of talk, I sort of thought it was a bit of a fizzer. So we've got a population commission, a regional tax review, and a sort of dubious transport policy. But I think, again, it's important to remember that this decentralisation pitch has always been kind of Melbourne-based in its thinking. It's about getting people from regional Victoria in and out of Melbourne, which is, of course, nice to do, but for most people, that's not something that they do often. And for lots of people, it's not something that they want to do often. The idea that, you know, having a whole bunch of commuter activity is the be-all and end-all to regional development, I think sort of misses the point. But their audience, the opposition's audience for their decentralisation talk, is very much in Melbourne's suburbs, and is all about telling people in Kew that the lifestyle that they have enjoyed is the one that their children will be able to enjoy, because there won't be too much development in the suburbs. I just think after all the talk, there's a lack of evidence that there's been hard work done on this. There's also the Commission of Audit in the first 100 days, which we know sort of results in things like what we had last time, 4,200 public servants gone across regional Victoria, the big cuts to TAFE, the CFA cuts, $120 million out of V-Line, the National Centre for Farmer Health, and all of those other things that you would, of course, remember. But we want to keep listening to communities, working closely with them, communities like Rapanya making the smart investments that will future-proof towns for those who want to grow, to help them to grow, for those who don't, to help them maintain their beautiful character that's so important to them and often really important to their industries. We're going to continue to support the big economic powerhouses of tourism and agriculture and renewable energy, but again, renewable energy in the right place. So Marlene mentioned the solar industry in Gunawarra. Other communities not so keen on having solar on top of their very nice irrigation infrastructure, for instance. So getting these things right is important, and listening to communities is at the absolute heart of that. Investing in health services, no matter how far from postcode 3,000 people are. The transformation of early years education, but also the digital economy. And I know the digital economy matters to you all very much. I know when I talk to you on the phones, it's often, what, huh? What did you say? Scratchy dropping out. You know, this is kind of how we all roll all of the time. And the work on the NBN needs to continue, must continue. Clearly a federal government responsibility, telecommunications. But we have, I think, as you all know, been very keen to find other things we can do to help overcome the digital divide. And so I've got a little announcement to share with you today. We are partnering with Spirit Telecom in what is a pilot for Horsham that will connect households and businesses to high-speed broadband. Now, this is really exciting, this pilot, because if it goes the way we think it's going to go, it's going to set up, I think it's going to set a template for us to roll out across lots and lots of communities of a particular size. So this $1.7 million project will deliver fixed wireless broadband up to 10 times faster than that's currently available in that community. Gigabit speeds that are on par with the best available in Melbourne. So it's one of 2 pilot demonstrations that we're running, and we think that the trial's going to show us that upfront investment by government and a partnership with telecommunications industry will enable some of our regional communities and rural communities to have the most cutting-edge technologies to develop genuinely high-speed broadband into their communities. So I think this is something that people in your communities will be very interested in. The rural city of Horsham will serve as proof of concept with opportunities for rural towns with similar footprints that can tap into fibre backhaul and present themselves into the future. So we've been mapping our own capability. We've been putting up mobile black spot towers all over the place. The regional partnerships have been developing amazingly detailed analyses of where connectivity is failing or inadequate, which will all be incredibly important tools. This is a whole new area for a state government to get involved in, but we know that it's important because you keep telling us that it is. So what the choice, I guess, that your communities have in a few weeks' time is, I would put to you the choice between something that is real and tangible and something that is very untested and unclear. We've embarked on unprecedented investment in our rural communities and regional communities that dwarfs that of any Victorian government beforehand. And I'd also just take a moment to just also put to you that our government has been bold and has tackled some groundbreaking reforms, including assisted dying legislation, legalising medicinal cannabis, the greatest investment in mental health services in the state's history, a royal commission into family violence, and in saying that, I make the point that when you map by postcode incidents of family violence, you have to get up to postcode number 16 before you land in Melbourne. So this is even more important for our communities than it is overall. The biggest law and order issue in the state. Redress for survivors of institutional sexual abuse, expunging historic criminal offences for gay men, for Aboriginal children. So some of these reforms have been incredibly important and will be incredibly important to the people that you represent and to the communities you represent as well. Health and education and growing jobs have been our key priority, and I think that the numbers and the outcomes show that. The effort that we're making is yielding results. It's cheaper to buy a home, cheaper to run a business. We're not a risk. We certainly won't be cutting essential services and won't be cutting frontline services. So we face the election with confidence, not because of any preconceived idea about how people will judge us. That's entirely for others to say, but because we are proud of our record and we've got, I think, the energy and the ideas to continue to govern the state for the next 4 years. Big plans for our rural communities, for the communities that you represent, a deep commitment for the work that you do, and a really, really strong desire to continue the partnership that will deliver great results for your communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Jaala. Jaala will be staying for morning tea, but we do have a couple of moments. So if you have a question, if you could grab the microphone, identify yourself, and please respect the position that Jaala's in.
Yeah, like that's the bit about how I'm not the minister for all those other things. But I'll try, I always do, right?
Stuck. There we go. Thank you, Minister. Ron Janis from the Alpine Shire. I'm the Mayor. This is not necessarily a question in relation to your ministry, but it's a request for an advocacy on behalf of rural councils. I didn't get to ask the question of Minister Carews, but you'll be aware of the regional council transformation program that's on offer, which is very generous, thank you. But what concerns us is that it's linked to the Fixing Country Roads program. So if we put in an application for Fixing Country Roads program, there's a little tick box at the bottom that says, are you involved in the program for regional council transformation program? So there's a link there. And there's a little bit that says, if you are not making an application with the transformation program, you may not get your country roads funding. Now, I don't know what that's about, other than when you think about it initially, it's almost like, well, if you're not with that, you're not going to get that. And it's a bit of a, dare I say, a gun to the head. And most rural councils find that distasteful. So I was wondering whether you could speak to Mr. Donnellan and some of your other colleagues to have that piece of wording removed from the application.
Sure, okay, all right. I did not know that, and that is the first time that's been raised with me. Look, happy to convey that and to try and get to the bottom of why they're linked in that way, and we might come back to you through the Secretariat with a kind of short answer on that.
It might just need some further explanation there, but on the face value of it, it doesn't sort of sit overly well.
Yeah, sure, and I understand why. So my educated guess is that we're keen to have as many people participate in the local government program that Marlene administers as we possibly can, and we want to encourage that. I've not been involved in the development of the guidelines for the Country Roads program, but I know that you would all make to us the case, the very, very strong relationship between rural council financial sustainability and your asset maintenance requirements. So they are intimately linked, but I can understand why you would think you would prefer them to not be so perhaps
so
specifically described.
Yes.
So we'll follow that up, and we'll
you.
send something back out to you through Secretariat to provide at least some context about what that's about, and some perhaps further information about exactly what the guidelines on that fund say. I assume that there are published guidelines on that fund.
Yes, there are.
So there might be some further explanation there as well.
And I believe RCV are going to approach certain ministers in that light as part of their advocacy role with RCV. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, it's probably, it wouldn't be anything sinister so much as recognising the pretty clear relationship that exists between the two. I remember the most spectacular description I ever saw of this problem was made at a council budget presentation by Tanya Keogh, who was the mayor at Pyrenees, and we were there in Beaufort, and she said, if you lined all our roads up one into the other, you'd be in Cooper Pedy. And I thought, goodness me, here we are, we're in Beaufort, we're a bloody long way from Cooper Pedy. That's like quite an effective way to make the point, and I know lots of you could probably do that, that and some, depending on what locations, what communities you're in. You guys can? Cairns, right. Gary's in Cairns. Yep, okay. All right, let's not turn this into a competition about who has more roads to maintain. We might be here for months.
That is in hand with RCV. We're very conscious of it, and we've spoken to several councils, so we've had no feedback yet that I'm aware of, Joe. No, not yet. So I guess watch this space. Yep. Okay, any further questions? Before we go for morning tea?
Hello, David Evans here, Golden Plains Shire. With all the rural shires, there's shires that don't want growth, there's ones that do.
Yep.
And we need population. There's no doubt about that. As a government, no government in Australia can build themselves out of the problems that you have in commuting in Melbourne. You'll never achieve it with money. Give us the money to improve. Don't build the freeway down here. It's not going to work. Give us the money to build up our communities, the infrastructure, everything that we need. If we have it out there, they'll come. The people will come. And you'll decentralise Melbourne by helping us. We need that. We're just not getting it. I'm suggesting in this election, take that attitude forward and we might actually get something out of this.
Yeah, okay, so Golden Plains is a really good example. Golden Plains is a shire with a number of communities that are that would look to Ballarat as a major service centre, and a number of communities that would look to Geelong as a major service centre. And Golden Plains have done a terrific job, particularly in Bannockburn, where they've been managing quite significant population growth over recent years. Started with the sewerage project, and there's been a whole lot since. And our government has been making significant investments in Bannockburn in partnership with the Golden Plains Shire Council. But there would be communities in your municipality that if you said to them, we're going to throw 20,000 extra people in your town, they might not be so keen on it. But yes, Golden Plains is certainly, I would have thought, one of the communities that would warmly embrace population growth. If we went to Torquay and stood in the main street and had this conversation, might not get the same reaction.
But I'm not actually advocating just for Golden Plains. I'm talking about all of Victoria. Okay, the peri-urban councils. Okay, you've got to start taking your focus off down Melbourne here.
My focus is never on Melbourne. So we've doubled effort, and we've introduced different tax rates, and we've restored services and grown them. So these are the things that contribute to population. Now, immigration policy is a matter for the Commonwealth Government, but we have a number of discrete projects in particular communities that are about settlement of migrants, and some really interesting work underway with the Federal Department of Immigration and Regional Development Victoria about southwest Victoria. So doubling the effort that government's making in regional Victoria in 4 years is a pretty good start. I would have thought they're about, well in excess of 1,000 public sector jobs, but the payroll tax, stamp duty concessions are some of the most effective things that a state government can do, short of like knocking on houses in suburban streets and saying, you, off you go, which we're not in the business of doing.
But fundamentally, we all talk about our roads in the rural area, and we simply cannot fund them. There's no way we can do it ourselves. If we can get population that can help us, okay? You let us build the little havens in our country areas. We can set up the infrastructure for the future on greenfield sites. We're not going to be in a situation in Melbourne when you have to absolutely spend an absolute fortune acquiring land to build something that isn't going to work anyhow.
Yeah, certainly.
Now, we can plan better in the country. We can actually go forward. We can build this country forward.
Yep, absolutely, and that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years, and we'd very much like the opportunity to continue in that vein rather than to sort of go back to where we were.
One last question.
Councillor Mary-Ann Brown, Mayor of Southern Grampian Shire. Jaala, thanks very much for coming, and certainly for your support with some funding in our shire. A couple of questions. I think David's partly touched on it about funding for enabling infrastructure, and one of the challenges, particularly in smaller towns, is about sewage systems, and there was a program in the past which provided financial support for that, and that would be good to see similar types of programs. So that's one question. Secondly, given that Pick My Project has just finished, what's the government's view about the continuation of that particular program?
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking about Pick My Project. On sewerage, not making any announcements or election commitments today, but suffice to say that I think it's been a while since we've had something like the small town sewerage scheme, and I think that it's, there's a very strong correlation between that kind of enabling infrastructure and private sector housing development and therefore population attraction. It can be in the right place in a community that supports it, a very effective tool, and so I might just leave my comments at that, but we've been having some interesting conversations with some of the water authorities about the places that might be well suited for that kind of project. Pick My Project was great fun. Our rural communities did very well. There were 247 projects, I think, statewide, and more than half of them were outside of Melbourne. The proportion of votes as well was well and truly skewed towards our rural and regional communities. People in regions got substantially more involved in Pick My Project than people did in Melbourne, but that's their business, I guess. But there's just been some terrific projects. So if I could tell you about the Murrindindi Shire, Alexandra had success with 2 projects and a pop-up indoor pool for kids to do swimming lessons and the scout hall. What we were told in the Murrindindi Shire was that the local library was throwing the doors open to help people turn up and vote and assist people to get online. And it was certainly put to me that everyone in that municipality knew about Pick My Project and everyone in that municipality cast their vote. Minyip also did exceptionally well, a couple of projects. There was also a community in the Wimmera that had success off a population of 76 people. So it was a bit of fun. We'll do an evaluation of it before making any decisions about whether we do it again or not. But it was really interesting, I think, to provide people in the community with an opportunity to pitch ideas in that aren't usually able to attract funding. These are the things that just always fall through the cracks, and that was very much our objective. $30 million program, half of which was for regional Victoria. So again, don't tell the people in Melbourne, but that was pretty heavily skewed our way too. And from my perspective, it was just lovely to see reward for effort. So there was a project, BMX track in Ballarat. They were successful. They have a membership of, I think they said 78 people. And so they went to Officeworks, they photocopied leaflets, all these BMX kids are dropping things in the letterboxes of their neighbours and G'ing up support. Most of the projects that I've seen have success received in the order of 200 votes. So I don't know, I really liked it. I thought it was really nice for some of the things that never get funded to have a go. We haven't made any decisions about whether we'll do it again or not, but they're my observations. But seeing people who were prepared to really kind of roll their sleeves up and go out and lobby did very, very well.
Could you please thank Minister Pulford for her address? She will be there for morning tea.